When we think about the power of ancient Rome, it's easy to picture legions marching under crimson banners, emperors giving speeches from marble pedestals, or roaring crowds in colossal arenas. But behind those grand images stood the men who shaped the fate of the greatest empire of antiquity, the generals. Today we'll uncover the lives of the 10 most feared military commanders in Roman history. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, but history would remember him by a title earned through blood, Africanus, and not by chance. He was the man who defeated Hannibal Barca, arguably the most feared enemy general Rome ever faced. During the Second Punic War, Rome was desperate. Hannibal had crossed the Alps with war elephants, devastated Roman armies, and was threatening the capital itself. But Scipio did not attempt to confront him head-on in Italy, as so many of his predecessors had fatally tried. Instead, he made a bold decision. He sailed to North Africa and carried the war directly to Carthage. His strategy forced Hannibal to abandon the Italian campaign and rush back to defend his homeland. The decisive confrontation came in 2020 BC at the Battle of Zama. Scipio had studied Hannibal's tactics with extraordinary care, adapting Roman formations and preparing his soldiers for the enemy's most dreaded weapon, the war elephants. By leaving deliberate gaps in his lines, he allowed the elephants to pass harmlessly through, where they could be driven off by noise, trumpets, and organized shouting. Many of the beasts panicked and turned on their own masters, sowing chaos among the Carthaginian ranks. Once the infantry clashed, Rome's iron discipline prevailed, and Hannibal was soundly defeated. This victory did not simply end a battle, it saved Rome from collapse and marked the turning point that would lead to its dominance over the western Mediterranean. It also secured Rome's future expansion into Iberia and beyond, all carried forward under the shadow of Scipio's brilliance. Gaius Marius came from Arpinum, a small town far from the senatorial elite, and his rise was built entirely on his ability as a soldier and commander. His legacy, however, extended beyond his victories. Until his time, Roman armies were composed primarily of landowners who could afford their own equipment. Marius changed this tradition by opening recruitment to the capititensi, the landless poor. For the first time, men without property could join the legions, receive standardized training, be equipped at the state's expense, and earn the promise of land upon retirement. This reform transformed the Roman military into a professional fighting force, yet it also created a dangerous precedent, for the loyalty of soldiers shifted from the Roman Senate to the general who led them. Marius embodied this change. He campaigned in Africa against Jugurtha of Numidia, but his most famous victories came in Italy and southern Gaul, where Rome faced the migrations of the Teutones and the Cimbri. These tribes had previously destroyed several Roman armies and posed an existential threat to the Republic. Marius reorganized the legions, drilled them relentlessly, and finally intercepted the invaders. At Aquae Sextiae and Vercellae, he destroyed them utterly, with ancient sources claiming more than 100,000 enemies killed. These triumphs made Marius a hero to the Roman people. He was elected consul 7 times, more than any man in history, and became a symbol of military power, reshaping political authority. Yet his growing influence inevitably brought him into conflict with rivals, none more dangerous than Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla was everything Rome did not expect in a dictator. Born into a relatively modest family, he was known in his youth for his fine clothing, sharp features, and taste for luxury. Yet behind this exterior was a calculating and ruthless mind. His early service in the Jugurthine War won him fame, especially when he masterminded the capture of Jugurtha himself, but his partnership with Marius soon soured into bitter enmity. The breaking point came during the war against King Mithridates of Pontus, when the Senate attempted to strip Sulla of command in favor of Marius. He made an unprecedented decision. He marched his legions on Rome itself. For the first time, Roman soldiers entered their own city as conquerors. Citizens fled in terror, senators panicked, and civil war erupted. Sulla crushed his enemies and established himself as dictator. Unlike earlier dictators whose powers were temporary and limited, Sulla used his position to remodel the republic. He rewrote laws, curtailed the powers of the tribunes, expanded the Senate, and sought to restore aristocratic control, yet his rule became infamous for the proscriptions, lists of political enemies condemned to death, their wealth confiscated, and their names erased from public life. Anyone could kill a proscribed man without consequence. Rome was stained with blood as thousands perished. Although Sulla eventually resigned his dictatorship and retired into private life, his example left a dark legacy. He had shown that political disputes could be settled by force of arms, and that personal ambition could outweigh the traditions of the Republic. Among those who inherited the world reshaped by Sulla was Gaius Pompeius Magnus, better known as Pompey the Great. Unlike Sulla, Pompey's rise was meteoric and built on dazzling military success at an astonishingly young age. His victories in Sicily and Africa earned him the favor of Sulla, who granted him the rare honor of a triumph while still a young man. This early brilliance secured him the title Magnus, the Great, a name he spent the rest of his career striving to justify. Pompey quickly proved his worth across the empire. He fought in Spain against the formidable rebel general Sertorius, campaigned in the east, and showed a relentless drive for glory. His most remarkable achievement, however, came in 67 BC, when Rome faced a crisis that had crippled Mediterranean commerce for decades: piracy. The seas were overrun by pirate fleets who disrupted trade, threatened food shipments, and even raided Italy itself. Given extraordinary powers by the Senate, Pompey organized one of the largest naval campaigns Rome had ever seen. He divided the Mediterranean into sectors, assigned fleets to patrol them, and executed a coordinated sweep of the waters. His efficiency was astonishing. In just 3 months, the pirates were crushed, their bases destroyed, and the Mediterranean restored to Roman control. For the first time in generations, Rome could truly call it Mare Nostrum, our sea. In just 3 months, the Mediterranean was back under Roman control. Once again, Mare Nostrum, our sea. After securing the seas, Pompey turned his gaze eastward, where the great challenge of King Mithridates of Pontus still threatened Rome's supremacy. Mithridates had defied Roman arms for decades, forging alliances and stirring rebellions across Asia Minor and Greece. Pompey pursued him relentlessly, pushing campaigns deep into the east with methodical brilliance. He reorganized the conquered provinces, imposed Roman administration, and brought a new order to lands that had resisted Roman influence for generations. Under his command, vast territories stretching from Asia Minor to Syria fell under Rome's sway, and he even reached as far as the borders of the Parthian Empire. His eastern victories expanded Roman influence farther than ever before, filling the treasury with spoils and cementing his reputation as one of the Republic's greatest conquerors. Such achievements made Pompey a figure of unmatched prestige, and with his fame came political power. It was this authority that led him into a pact with two of the most ambitious men of his age, Julius Caesar and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Together they formed the First Triumvirate, an informal but immensely powerful alliance that dominated Roman politics. Pompey's military glory, Crassus's wealth, and Caesar's growing popularity created a balance of influence that seemed unshakable. Yet the harmony of the alliance was fragile, bound more by personal ties than by trust. Pompey's marriage to Julia, Caesar's beloved daughter, provided a bond between the two men, but when she died in childbirth, the connection was broken. Not long after, Crassus marched east in a disastrous campaign against the Parthians and was killed at Carrhae, leaving Caesar and Pompey as rivals with no buffer between them. Rome found itself once again divided. Pompey aligned with the Senate, presenting himself as the defender of the Republic, while Caesar's power and popularity with his legions continued to grow. Tensions escalated until Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, an act that made civil war inevitable. The decisive confrontation came the following year at the Battle of Pharsalus, where Caesar's smaller but more seasoned army outmaneuvered Pompey's larger force. Defeated, Pompey fled across the Mediterranean, seeking refuge in Egypt, but Egypt offered no sanctuary. Hoping to curry favor with Caesar, the advisors of the young King Ptolemy XIII ordered Pompey's assassination. He was lured ashore and murdered, his severed head presented as a grisly token of allegiance. When Caesar saw it, he did not rejoice but wept. In that moment, one of Rome's greatest soldiers was gone, and with him the final remnants of the old republican order began to fade. Julius Caesar wasn't just a military commander. He was a force of nature. He redrew the map of Roman politics, conquered vast territories, and ultimately paid the price for defying every convention of his time. His rise began in politics, but it was on the battlefield where his legacy was immortalized. Between 58 and 50 BC, Caesar led the Gallic Wars with an army fiercely loyal to him. He faced dozens of tribes, crossed treacherous forests and rivers, and famously defeated the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix by besieging his stronghold at Alesia, using a double line of fortifications, one facing outward to stop reinforcements and one inward to trap the enemy. It was the perfect mix of military engineering and ruthless strategy. By conquering Gaul, Caesar didn't just triple Rome's territory, he also became incredibly wealthy and wildly popular among his soldiers and the Roman people. But the Senate, especially Pompey, saw him as a growing threat. When ordered to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, Caesar made a choice that would echo through history. He crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, an act of war. "The die is cast," he reportedly said. And with that, the Roman Republic plunged into another civil war. Caesar defeated Pompey at Pharsalus, chased his remaining enemies to Egypt, entangled himself with Cleopatra, and continued campaigning through the eastern provinces. When he returned to Rome, he was declared dictator for life. He reformed the calendar, creating what we now call the Julian calendar, centralized authority, and had coins minted bearing his own image. It seemed he was untouchable, but his end came where he felt safest: the Senate. In 44 BC, a group of conspirators, among them Brutus, whom Caesar regarded almost as a son, stabbed him 23 times beneath a statue of Pompey. His assassination sent shockwaves through Rome. Instead of restoring the Republic, Caesar's death plunged the city into yet another civil war. Mark Antony embodied everything Rome expected in a leader: charismatic, brave in battle, a skilled orator, and fiercely loyal to his allies. He was Caesar's right-hand man in many campaigns, including the decisive victory at Pharsalus. After Caesar's assassination, Antony was among the first to seize control of the political chaos. His public reading of Caesar's will, which incited the people against the conspirators, remains one of the most powerful political moves in Roman history. To solidify power, Antony formed the Second Triumvirate with Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Lepidus. They divided the Roman world among themselves, but the alliance was fragile from the start. When Antony took command of the eastern provinces, he met the woman who would change everything: Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Their romance shocked Rome, but it wasn't just love, it was strategy. Antony settled in Alexandria, had children with Cleopatra, and in a provocative move, recognized those children as kings of eastern territories. To many Romans, it was nothing short of betrayal. Octavian seized the moment, launching a propaganda war. Antony had become too Eastern, he had abandoned Roman values. Tensions erupted in the great naval clash at Actium in 31 BC, where Octavian's forces crushed the fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. Surrounded and defeated, Antony took his own life in 30 BC. Cleopatra followed soon after. With their deaths, Egypt was annexed, and the Roman Republic finally came to an end. If Octavian became the first emperor of Rome, it was Agrippa who made him victorious. Born outside the aristocracy, Agrippa was Octavian's childhood friend. But his loyalty wasn't just personal, it was strategic, unwavering, and above all effective. Where Octavian was a politician, Agrippa was a general. Where the prince hesitated, Agrippa acted. And when Rome needed victories, Agrippa delivered. His greatest triumph came at the Battle of Actium, the climactic confrontation that decided the fate of the Roman world. While Antony and Cleopatra placed their hopes in their prestige, charisma, and the symbolic allure of their alliance, Agrippa relied on calculation and strategy. He struck first by cutting off their supply lines, harassing their ports, and isolating their fleets. He personally commanded Octavian's navy, orchestrating maneuvers with discipline and precision. His ships pressed relentlessly against Antony's line, using their superior seamanship to disrupt formations. Through bold and carefully timed naval tactics, Agrippa forced the Egyptians and their allies into retreat, and by the end of the day, Antony and Cleopatra were broken, fleeing toward Egypt. It was Agrippa's genius, not Octavian's, that secured the decisive victory and ended the last great resistance to Roman supremacy. Yet Agrippa's greatness was not confined to the battlefield. He was also an administrator of extraordinary vision. After Octavian, he reorganized the Roman army, ensuring its efficiency and loyalty in a new age of imperial power. He undertook vast public works that transformed the fabric of Rome itself. He improved the aqueduct system to bring clean water into the growing capital, drained swamps to reclaim fertile land, and oversaw the construction of new public baths that became centers of Roman civic life. Perhaps most famously, he built the first pantheon, a temple to all the gods which later emperors would rebuild into the form we still see today. In him, the Roman people saw not only a war commander but also an architect of peace and stability. Agrippa's career extended far beyond Rome's walls. He campaigned in the distant provinces, leading operations in northern Hispania and the rugged Balkans. These campaigns strengthened the empire's borders, pacified rebellious regions, and brought lasting security to territories that had long resisted Roman rule. Despite his immense power and unmatched record, Agrippa never sought the throne. He never betrayed Octavian, even though he held both the military strength and political support to do so. Instead, he cemented his loyalty by marrying Octavian's daughter Julia and was named heir before his sudden and premature death. In him, Rome witnessed a rare example of a man who wielded enormous influence, yet chose loyalty over ambition. Agrippa may be the clearest example that, in Rome, glory didn't always come from the throne. Tall, charismatic, and brilliant on the battlefield, Germanicus seemed destined for greatness. Nephew of Emperor Tiberius, grandson of Mark Antony, and officially adopted as heir to the throne, he symbolized a new virtuous generation of Roman leadership. Beloved by his troops and admired by the people, his fame wasn't just inherited, it was earned through the sword. After the trauma of the Teutoburg forest disaster, where 3 Roman legions were annihilated by Germanic tribes under Arminius, Rome demanded revenge, and it was Germanicus who led that mission. Commanding operations along the Rhine frontier, he launched daring campaigns into the heart of Germania. He marched through dark, treacherous forests, crossed swollen rivers, and defied the superstition that the region was cursed. In one of the most symbolic acts of his career, he recovered the scattered bones of the Roman dead from Teutoburg, gathering the remains of fallen soldiers and giving them proper burials with solemn ceremony. This act not only honored the legions but also restored morale across Rome, proving that the Republic's memory had not been erased. Germanicus then struck back with ferocity. In 16 AD, at the Battle of the Weser River, he confronted Arminius in open combat. He combined the discipline of Roman legions with the mobility of cavalry, coordinating attacks that shattered Germanic formations. The losses inflicted on Arminius's forces were severe, and though Germanicus could never be fully subdued, Germanicus reasserted Roman dominance and avenged the humiliations of the past. Yet just as his star shone brightest, his career was cut short. Summoned back to Rome by order of Tiberius, Germanicus was dispatched on a diplomatic mission in the eastern provinces. There, under suspicious circumstances, he fell gravely ill and died. Many whispered that he had been poisoned at the emperor's command, a victim of jealousy and political intrigue. His death sent waves of grief through the empire. His funeral was one of the most elaborate Rome had ever seen, and the people mourned as though they had lost an emperor already enthroned. His legacy lived on, though tragically twisted, through his son Caligula and his great-nephew Nero, both of whom would ascend the imperial throne with far darker destinies. Agricola may not be the most famous name in Roman history, but his legacy echoed across the misty fields of Britannia, a remote hostile land fiercely resistant to Roman rule. Born into a prestigious family, Agricola rose steadily through the ranks, proving himself not only as a strict and efficient administrator, but also as a commander of vision. When he was appointed governor of Britannia in 77 AD, the island was still only partially subdued. Rome held sway in the south, but the central and northern tribes remained independent and hostile, striking at Roman settlements and disrupting the fragile frontier. Agricola set about changing that balance. For 7 years he waged almost unbroken campaigns, steadily extending Roman control further north and west. His approach combined military power with careful integration. He constructed a network of forts, fortresses and roads, not only to move his troops quickly across the rugged terrain, but also to project Roman authority deep into enemy lands. He created permanent settlements, established administrative hubs, and encouraged local chieftains to adopt Roman ways, offering them positions of influence and access to Roman wealth. Through these measures he wove Britannia more tightly into the fabric of the empire. But Agricola was never content to remain behind walls. He personally led his troops on campaign, driving farther north than any Roman before him, into the highlands of what is now Scotland. His most decisive moment came at the Battle of Mons Graupius, where a coalition of Caledonian tribes sought to repel Roman advance. Agricola's forces, disciplined and strategically deployed, inflicted a crushing defeat. Roman casualties were minimal, while the enemy suffered catastrophic losses. For a moment, it seemed as though even the wild north of Britannia might bow before Rome's power. It was also under his leadership that Roman naval expeditions finally confirmed what had long been suspected, that Britannia was in fact an island. But success came with a cost. The Emperor Domitian, jealous and deeply insecure about the fame of his generals, recalled Agricola to Rome. Though he had delivered some of the most decisive victories in the empire's northern frontier, Agricola was never entrusted with another command. His brilliance had drawn too much attention, and in the shadow of an emperor who feared rivals, such talent was dangerous. He lived the remainder of his life in silence, his reputation untarnished but his future stifled. Whispers of poisoning surrounded his death, a fate that befell many who had risen too high under suspicious rulers. Agricola's story became a reminder of how often Rome devoured its brightest lights. Drusus was the younger brother of Tiberius and the cherished son of Livia, wife of Augustus. From an early age he showed a restless energy and natural charisma that set him apart from his peers. Unlike many Roman nobles who inherited glory through lineage, Drusus forged his fame with the sword. His courage and vigor quickly earned him the trust of Augustus, who saw in him the qualities of a statesman and soldier destined for greatness. He launched bold campaigns that carried Rome's banners across the Rhine River into the untamed lands of Germania. At a time when many Roman commanders hesitated to push too far into unknown territories, Drusus pressed forward. Between 12 and 9 BC, he led a series of relentless expeditions deep into the Germanic heartland. He subdued tribes such as the Tenteri, the Usipetes and the Sugambri, and he advanced Roman power as far as the Weser and even the distant Elbe River. These were frontiers no Roman had reached before, landscapes of thick forests, hostile warriors, and uncharted rivers. His willingness to venture so far into the unknown demonstrated both daring ambition and a clear vision of Rome's expansion, yet conquest alone did not win him admiration. Drusus was celebrated for his sense of fairness and for the way he bound himself to his soldiers. He shared their dangers, endured their hardships, and lived as one of them rather than above them. He marched alongside them on campaign, ate their food, and lay upon the same hard ground at night. This closeness gave him not just loyalty but affection from his men. His army did not follow him out of duty alone but out of devotion, and that bond became one of the cornerstones of his enduring reputation. Tragedy struck at the very height of his promise. In 9 BC, after a campaign that had once again carried him deep into Germanic lands, Drusus was thrown from his horse during a retreat. His injuries proved fatal, and despite the best efforts of his companions, he died within days. He was only 29 years old. The news of his death plunged Rome into mourning. Augustus, who had seen in him the future of Roman command, wept openly. Tiberius, his brother, rode for days across treacherous terrain to be with him in his final hours, a journey that reflected both love and grief. Drusus's passing left a void, but his name did not vanish from history. Monuments and honors were raised to celebrate his memory, and he was venerated as a model of Roman virtue cut short in his prime. More than that, the title he had won through valor, Germanicus, was bestowed upon his descendants, ensuring that his legacy lived on. His son, the celebrated Germanicus, and even his grandson, the infamous Emperor Caligula, carried the name. Though their paths diverged, one admired as a noble commander, the other feared as a tyrant. They stood in the shadow of Drusus's unfinished story. The history of Rome is often told through the voices of emperors and senators, but it was the generals, those men of vision, courage, and relentless ambition, who truly shaped the empire's destiny. They were the ones who pushed into uncharted lands, who made life-and-death decisions that altered the fate of nations, and who carried the weight of Rome's survival on their shoulders. Some of them forged glory through conquest, building Rome's power across continents. Others stood as bulwarks against disaster, defending the empire in its darkest hours. Many paid for their brilliance with exile, betrayal, or sudden death. Yet whether they triumphed or fell, each left a legacy etched deep into the empire's fabric. If you enjoyed discovering the brilliant minds behind Rome's military power, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and as always, may Mars guide you in battle.